Hello and welcome to UAP Check News, your demonetized and ad-free source of information on unidentified anomalous phenomena. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Matthew Szydagis, Associate Professor of Department of Physics at the State University of New York, University at Albany, for the pre-publication of his paper titled Initial Results from the First Field Expedition of UAPx to Study Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. Welcome, Dr. Szydagis.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure. I've been following your work for years now, and I'm really very glad to be able to talk to you. So, to begin with, can you explain what is exactly UAPx?
Sure, UAPx is a nonprofit organization in the United States that was started by Navy veterans Kevin Day and Gary Voorhees with the purpose of trying to solve the mysteries of what UAP or UAPs are. And it has existed for several years and was featured in the documentary film by Carolyn Corey called A Terror in the Sky. So what Gary and Kevin Day did was recruit scientists to collaborate with them. So they found first my colleague, Professor Kevin Knuth, who recruited me, and I in turn recruited my colleague, Professor Cecilia Levy. All of us are co-authors on the paper. I should emphasize that this was a team effort that got, and it took like 2.5 years to get a scientific paper written about what we found and saw during the course of the filming of the documentary. Oh, I should also
Absolutely. Can you? Most scientists are familiar with laboratory sciences or even theoretical physics. Can you explain the difference between field observation and work in the laboratory?
Yes, so there are several sciences, including in physics, like astrophysics, cosmology, that are observational. And the difference is that you don't have controlled conditions, so reproducibility is difficult. Reproducibility and replication are hallmarks of the scientific method, but are very challenging in the wild, so to speak. So biologists, zoologists have this problem also, observing animal behavior, for example, in the wild. So observational science requires a lot of patience because you may not see anything for a long time. And so you have a different set of challenges than you do in the laboratory, especially when it comes to establishing control data or background data.
And what was the most challenging in organizing that field experiment?
Um, well, there were a lot of challenges. We had to work with a film crew because it's necessary. It was necessary to get funding to be able to do an expedition at all, and it's challenging balancing the scientific needs where you just want a lot of scientists are introverts or have difficult personalities. We just want to be left alone to do our work and not have to film a scene, for example, but focus on calibration and the establishment and setup of the equipment.
Would you have an example of that type of conflict that arose during your work?
Well, we didn't catch the our most interesting event on the FLIR cameras, only on the UFO camera, which is more visible light and near IR, and that was probably due to a film equipment being plugged in, tripping a circuit breaker, which happened more than once. So I should emphasize it wasn't, it wasn't UAP turning off our equipment or something like that. There was a very mundane explanation for the a power failure of the FLIR cameras, and it's really unfortunate because if we had FLIR cameras seeing the same effect, then it would have completely resolved the question of whether our most interesting ambiguity was an effect internal to the camera or on the camera lens, or was it real and out there physically in the sky? And we would have gotten data from a different wavelength as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Now that it has been 2 years, would you have done things in another way than what you originally planned?
Not a completely different way, but just adding a few um, a few key changes to the procedure. This is all outlined in our paper where we discuss our lessons learned from the expedition. And the most important thing that was missing was time synchronization. Is we should have synchronized the clocks, watches, everything across every computer and every phone, because without that, it's very hard to be able to robustly conclude whether an ambiguous or anomalous observation across multiple sensors were actually at the same time or not, right? Did we have a 1 minute error, 2 minute? Like, it's bad. We should have gotten second level resolution or sub-second. That's the main thing. Also, precise instrument locations and angles that the cameras are pointed at. Those are crucial things that we should have done differently, and we will if we ever get money for future expeditions. Those are crucial things that are missing, and we don't hide these facts. They're in the paper. We have a very humble account saying that we made these mistakes and we're going to fix them next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to recommend the audience that they read the paper, because it's really a field journal of everything that happened
Mhm,
and the lessons learned for the next occurrence. So
mhm,
it's really uh, there are some scientific papers that are really hard to read as a piece of literature, for example. But that one is really interesting because it's almost a story narrated in a scientific way about your experiments on the field and what worked, what didn't work,
mhm.
where there is still shadows in the data that you are not sure what it is. And I cannot recommend enough the audience that they read themselves the paper, because it's a really interesting paper. Even if you don't have any base in science, there is enough content in it that explain what is happening on the field, that everybody can understand what is happening. Um, what really interested me is that you used the field experiments to test the different tools you had on site to record the different events. Would there Is there a single instrument you think could be enough to properly record UAP, or you absolutely need to have different instruments that are all recording together to be sure that what you are recording is an anomaly?
Well, we answered this in the conclusion of our paper. Actually, is that no, there is no one sensor, and that having only one, I mean, like happened to us unintentionally with our most interesting event. We only got it on the visually got it on the UFO app. We recommend not only having a minimum of two different types of sensors, but a minimum of two of each in each category. And what types of sensors? Well, we want to look at historical UAP data in order to think about what sensors would work the best. Obviously, you need cameras, but you need cameras at different wavelengths. You also need radiation, ionizing radiation detection, and electromagnetic field detection. And these things are justified based on historical cases. So while we can't use historical cases directly, like, eyewitness testimony is not scientific evidence, but we can use historical cases and witness testimony to come up with ideas for what would good sensors be in order to study the phenomena.
And are all the tools are available, or are there a lack in instruments that you would need to design, for example, that could be sets of different instruments linked together?
So there is still some work to be done on that front. So my colleague Kevin Knuth is working on this is mentioned in the paper, like a rotating gimbal of small cameras and lenses that are rotated in order to look at the same object at different levels of zoom and different wavelengths, with and without, filters, polarizers, things like that, where you have maybe one primary camera system like the UFO DAP, but then it tells the other systems to to rotate and zoom onto the same position when it makes a detection. So there's things like that that still need to be done, but primarily the issue is money, right? If we might get all the equipment we need and be able to just record, everything, but we have to be practical and work with what we have and build up our basic level of equipment.
I think it's a very good point. Can you explain to the audience how uh, you can obtain money for field research, how grants are attributed, and how it is difficult for UAP studies to get any type of funds for research?
There are no grants, at least not federal ones, for this topic. You can't ask, NASA or the NSF or the DOE for money. You just have to scrounge around for a couple dollars here and there from private donations, um, or you have to have a millionaire or billionaire friend. So it's extremely hard because there are no funding instruments or mechanisms officially, and not only that, but you still have significant stigma and taboo against the topic that makes it extremely difficult um, to raise funds.
That's a question I would like to ask you. That in the past 6 months, have you noticed an evolution in the stigma inside the scientific field, or everybody is still very closed doors about it?
There's definitely been some change, but there's still a lot of people, individual people, uh, who are very much opposed to the study of UAP or think it's laughable. Because remember that the cultural shifts and changes are very hard. They can take a great deal of time, but there's definitely a lot of evidence that the stigma is falling because, for one thing, we were able to get our paper up on the archive website, ARXIV. It's not peer review, but in recent years, archive, which is run out of Cornell, will do a lot of sort of unofficial review, and so they tend to reject, papers based on UFOs, UAP. And again, they're not. It's not peer review. They're supposed to accept almost everything, and they do a very high percentage. But they'll tend to put on hold indefinitely or just quietly remove papers on this topic. So I was really scared that this would happen because I didn't want to give up. Because I can just post this PDF anywhere. We can put it on the UAPx website. But then I feel like then we let the proponents of the stigma win, and I don't think that's right. I think we need to continue to fight hard and chip away at the stigma. I think that's extremely crucial to do. So we are very happy we were able to get the preprint of our paper up on archive, which again, even though it's not peer review, it's it's still considered pretty seriously by many different fields, including in physics. It's still considered a very serious and rigorous website. And because even though they don't have peer review, they do have moderation, a sort of like quasi peer review. Like nobody reads your paper in full and gives you comments. But if something is complete crackpot work or nonsensical, they try to stop those kinds of things from appearing on their website.
Yes, and it's AXA is a tool used by well, pretty much any scientist today to validate the data they recovered and to ensure that the peer-reviewed process isn't affected by the data itself. So, but for the audience that have that doesn't know about science and how scientists work, can you explain how important it is for a scientific team to have his results published and available on the platform?
Yes, it's extremely important because you want people to be able to build on your work. So we're hoping that other groups now, like now groups that have already their own publications as well, and very important ones. Like there's Dr. Beatriz Villarreal of the Vasco. There's of course Avi Loeb, Galileo Project. We want and Wes Waters and the Galileo Project. We want people like that to then be able to cite our work as we cited them, to be able to have in our bibliographies, our references, be able to not just cite but build upon each other's work and come and build off of each other, because that's how a real scientific field works. Is you don't just have people all working on their own thing in a vacuum, but people can, even if they're competing in a way, they still should be able to, regardless of their complementary projects or competitive, be able to reference each other. There's also the validation of results even after a paper is through peer review. It's not magical. There are flaws in the process. It can still be wrong. So you want you want papers to be publicly available. That's also the reason why we submitted our preprint to archive before it's through peer review, not because we think it's perfect and done already. No, there'll probably be significantly more changes after we go through peer review. However, it's very important to us as part of the mission of UAPx to make sure that everything we do is transparent and open source as fast as possible. The beauty of archive is you can download and read our paper and it's not behind a paywall. Depending what journal we eventually submit to, the final version might end up behind a paywall, might not be open access. So we want to make sure that people can see what we have as fast as we could. It took 2.5 years, but that's because science is slow. So you don't like talk about as fast as possible, science is still slow. But we didn't want to have people to continue to need to wait, because there's still, as we discussed earlier, there's still some stigma, there's still some taboo, and it may take many months, it may take years still before we have another version of the paper that's finally made it through external scientific peer review. But we wanted to make sure that the community could already see this preliminary version and can start reading and digesting that, and also critiquing. Right, you get free peer review if we get an email that says, hey, you have a typo on this page, or more seriously, this scientific thing is not correct from a fellow scientist. So you get sort of a little bit of free peer review then, like outsource, when you posted something on archive before you've submitted to a journal. So we want this the open source nature of the archive. So the archive has pluses and minuses. Like I said, sometimes they over moderate content and tend to act like peer reviewers, but there's also positives where the archive allows free open science, open access for $0. You don't even have publication fees for archive. Anybody can just go make an account, and post. So it is $0 open access, and so it allows the world to, especially the scientific community, not just the general public, to be able to download and read our article. And archive also has the source code. So basically, you don't just download a PDF. By clicking the right button on archive, you get the actual source code, and so you get high resolution, like vector scalable images of all of our figures, our tables, all of our data. So, if you're a debunker and you want to zoom in on some like dot of like one of our images, you can do that because we put in the highest quality uncompressed images. So it's like pretty huge when you download it. It's like 20 or 30 megabytes with all the figures. If you download the entire, like a zip archive of all the raw data in our work.
Yes, that's something that is very poorly known, but to access scientific research, you need to pay the journal to access the paper you're looking for. And when you have to sort through 50 different papers, you need to buy them, in fact, to the journal to read them. And it can be extremely expensive. Even to submit your paper, you need to pay the journal to do the review.
Yeah. So, but no, archive is the way to get around all that. So actually, when the president of the United States a while ago, when President Biden was talking about open access and mandating open access, I was thinking to myself, man, he's got really bad science advisors. I would just tell him, it's called archive. It's done already. Just make everybody use it. Like it's done. The problem is solved, but just not across all fields. Not across all fields. In my field of dark matter, I'm not talking about UFOs, but my day job. I mean, it's an open secret. Everybody knows. You submit your paper to archive. Then you submit to the journal. Nobody reads the journal paper. That costs money. Just go to archive. And it's just a dirty secret. Technically, I'm sure it's like copyright, blah, 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 but nobody cares. The journals don't enforce either. So you just put your paper on archive and everybody reads that for $0. So the paywalls of journals are kind of a joke now, because everybody, like, if people don't use archive, it's their fault for not knowing about it. Now, like I said, there are downsides, which are, if you're going to be working on a controversial topic, you may get blocked and your work may not be allowed. They do not accept everything. They accept almost everything because they are not a journal, but not 100% of everything. So that is very important to keep in mind. However, like I said, on the balance, I think it's pretty positive. So like, if I need to look up a paper, I almost never look it up in Physical Review D or whatever. I don't have paywalls because the university pays for all the journals. But if I ever run into a paywall, I go, I just copy the title, paste it into archive, and go, there it is, for free. I mean, the versions won't always match, but most of the time it does. Like, most of the time people have version 1 on archive, version 2, and then they'll have another version that's like almost matches the published version. Not 100%, because again, don't want to get sued by the journal for copyright violation. You just change one word or something, or you don't use the journal's logo or anything like that, and then you just submit the final peer-reviewed version on archive. Like, that's what we do in my experiment, my dark matter experiment, LZ. Is then after the first version, we resubmit to archive a new version that's after peer review, and it's just it's just an understood thing we do in my field. But again, all fields of physics and all fields of science, it's not the same. There are fields out there that don't use archive, and I feel awful for them, and they pay out the nose, hundreds and thousands of dollars even. It's like, what's going on with you guys? Just use archive. We've solved this problem. So, and there are also open access journals, as you point out, that charge money, and I'm just puzzled. I'm like, why should I pay you $2,000 or $3,000 for open access when I can pay archive $0 and it's open access? It's like, what the hell's going on? So yeah, academia is really messed up when it comes to peer review. There's some weird problems that are going on right now, and different fields of academia are, like I said, inconsistent. Some have already figured this out, and others still haven't figured out the solution and are still like charging people out the nose. And the problem is that how do you pay your editors and editorial staff? Somebody has to pay. So if they're not charging the authors, which I don't think they should, they got to charge universities, and someone's got to pay in the end. But I think that right now the hodgepodge, inconsistent system we have is not very good or very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I was really happy that it was on AXA, because that's the treasure trove for other science journalists that are covering a wide area of science. But people need to realize that when you see an article about science that is publishing in a paper, for 1 week it has been on a scientific news aggregator somewhere on a website. But before that, for 2 weeks, it was on archive, and you could have access to the whole data immediately when it's published. So you just need to go on archive and you have everything, and you are aware of everything 3 weeks before main newspaper or even realize it happened.
Now, the downside, of course, is, like I said, it's not peer-reviewed. So the articles can absolutely still have mistakes and not be in their final versions. But the benefits of immediate open access are immense. One of the benefits of archive is it mitigates problems that used to happen for decades in science and still happen. Things like, an editor at a journal will block a paper, steal the idea, and publish it themselves. Archive mitigates that risk by putting your paper up before peer review. It has, again, the danger that it's not accurate because not peer review yet, but it has the plus side of it mitigates risk of being scooped by unscrupulous editors and blind peer reviewers and things like that. So again, there are pluses and minuses to all these different systems of scientific paper sharing.
And the main benefit for me is that if something is validated by Cornell, but has very strong mistakes in it, the community that reads the paper by itself notes the mistake. So you have a kind of committee review board of the audience of the paper that can then correct the mistakes inside it. And I find that way of doing things really healthy for scientific research, to be honest.
Yes. Yes, exactly. In addition to having 2 or 3 qualified expert reviewers, you can have the entire world, right? And you can have people send you an email. It's not anonymous, but what if you do get an email and it's legitimate from an expert in some scientific discipline who says, "Hey, you're wrong, on page 17, and here's the proof." That's incredibly valuable. I think it strengthens the peer review process, because then you have two types of peer review, right? You have the traditional blind, but then you have the unblind from the entire world. Anyone can send you a message, and of course you ignore the crackpots. But if there's a serious message from an expert in a discipline that says you're wrong on this page, you can be like, "Wow, you're right. We'll fix that." And so I think it's incredibly beneficial to have your paper on archive. It really is. And so we are very thrilled that we managed to get it up there. But then now we've got the additional hurdle, which again, we cannot say anything to the community. People will ask. It could take months, it could take years before we take this preprint from archive and get it successfully through proper peer review. That can take forever, especially given the stigma still just in that topic. So people are going to have to be patient, and maybe in a month, maybe in a few weeks, or maybe in a year, who knows what the timeline is, they may see a new version appear that's been through peer review at some journal, and people are just going to need to be like ridiculously patient, and then they'll be able to see like what aspects of our work withstood peer review, which things needed more detail, which things needed to be fleshed out.
I remember that even when Dr. Nolan and Dr. Valley published their paper, it took them 2 years to have
Mm-hmm.
it peer reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, he didn't really talk about UAP, it was just a process of examining debris at very high precision. And it still took them 2 years of validation to have it published. So people really need to understand that there is a very slow process of review, especially, particularly on topics that are a bit fringe, like UAPs, where journals are extremely cautious about their reputation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it can happen to mainstream results. My colleague Cecilia and I, we were stuck for 4 years on a completely non-controversial result with a new type of dark matter detector we created, and we just got unlucky with very close-minded, referees and editors. Even though we had a pretty mainstream, non-controversial result, really backed up well statistically. So it's yeah, there's a lot of inconsistency. I think it would be hilarious if we got like the UAPx paper through peer review faster than some of the papers I've been stuck with, anywhere between 2 to 4 years, on very mainstream, non-controversial results that are still novel, but not that novel that people should think that they're wrong. So yeah, it's but the thing is, the quality assurance aspect of review, and the word peer is very important in peer review. It's not just Joe Schmo who has no clue about physics, or astronomy or astrophysics or particle physics. The peer term is very important. You need people that are within your discipline, and that's extremely hard when you're working at interdisciplinary boundaries.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And another thing that was really interesting to me is that on an open platform like Archive, you can have your paper read by many specialists, but of other fields of science. So, for example, I'm looking to atmospheric plasma right now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very particular area of science, very poorly known, with very few experts about it, and they only work on that their whole life to be able to have a bit of comprehensive approach about it. And I think it's really interesting to have that paper in open access, because you can have that type of scientist involved in your research and can link the data with something they discovered on their very specific field, but that you can't know because you can't know what every specialist everywhere is discovering at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding your field experiments, can you explain how the field study campaign that led to your paper came about? Why that location? And how did you select the instruments?
So the location of Catalina Island surrounding area was strategic. It has to do with the fact that it's a known UAP hotspot, supposedly, but even more importantly, it was the site of the 2004 Nimitz carrier strike group encounters of the famous, Tic Tac, and both Gary Voorhees and Kevin Day, who founded UAPx, they were involved. They weren't the pilots. That was like Fravor and Dietrich um, and others, but they were on the ships, and so that was the reason for the location. And in terms of the equipment, again, it wasn't really because it was again, it was our first expedition. It wasn't um, it wasn't like a pre-planned list of here's what we're going to have and calibrate. It was a hodgepodge where different people brought things to the table, especially David Mason, who's a Washington State technician from the Seattle area, who's collected a whole bunch of his own FLIR cameras, night vision goggles, and a whole bunch of things. And so a lot of the a lot of the equipment we had, like I brought a cosmic watch radiation detector, and then we also used we after the expedition we looked at publicly available data sets like you just had up. Actually, one of the key points in our paper was that we looked at Doppler weather radar data to try to see if we had corroborative evidence for one of our ambiguities after the fact. So we combine the bringing of equipment together with checking of publicly available resources like public Doppler weather radar data to see if there are hits.
And what is the strangest thing you recorded?
The strangest thing we recorded is still the was a dark spot in the camera, which still doesn't have a conclusive explanation. We're not calling it an anomaly; we're calling it an ambiguity because it's not quite. It's got enough potential mundane explanation that it wouldn't be right to call it an anomaly, but it is an ambiguity because yes, you've got it up right now. We have this dark spot that we caught in the UFO DAP camera system. We in the paper we lay out the reasons why it can't be or can be things, stupid things, like a droplet of water, a fly on the lens, things like that. We go through and we carefully weigh and quantitatively when possible, but not always. It wasn't always possible quantitatively, but we have 10 different prosaic hypotheses or explanations for this dark spot, which also later had white dots side of it that then disappeared, and a new white dot that appeared, and there was multiple strange behaviors that cannot simply be explained away as camera noise or a water drop. You can explain one aspect of this ambiguity usually by one of the mundane hypotheses, but you can't catch all of them. And so it's still weird. Our conclusion of the paper, though, is this is still a null result because we can't conclusively say something like, oh, it's like, alien ships in the sky or something. We can't prove that. And so we do not conclude that. We conclude humbly that this is still a null result. And we have no anomalies. We have at least one effect, this one, that's still an ambiguity. It's ambiguous because we cannot definitively say it's anomalous and it is something weird, but we cannot point to a specific explanation and say, oh, it was this, because none of the prosaic explanations fit all the facts. They'll fit one of them really well, and a skeptic or debunker is going to hug that one aspect and say, oh my God, I explained it. It's a water drop or a fly or camera noise. And it's like, but what about the other aspects, like the video before it, the video after the main video? What about this aspect of it? No one has an explanation for all of these aspects, not that I've seen. not that I've seen. And of course, even before a paper, we gave talks. We had a SCU conference talk that has a YouTube video with, I think, hundreds of thousands of views by now. We also discussed this event on the History Channel show The Proof Is Out There, and we have a video of that on YouTube from History Channel with hundreds of thousands of views. And you've got all these YouTube commenters who are like, "Ha ha, it's a water droplet, it's a fly, it's this and that." It's like, not if you look at all the different corroborative data points. No, that doesn't work. And so you have a lot of armchair debunkers who are like 100% sure they know the answer. If you look at the paper, there are many instances where we're close to 100% sure we know the answer, and we humbly acknowledge those. And we said, oh, this was this type of thing, this was the International Space Station, this was something else, this was not a UFO. So where we do have an explanation, we do not hide anything, we humbly acknowledge. So we're not trying to, for example, because I mentioned earlier, funding, we're not pretending we have some anomaly that we don't have in order to try to scare up more, funding for UAPx. The only thing you're ever going to get from UAPx is the truth. Our loyalty is to the truth. It is, if we self-debunk every single one of our ambiguities or as being like a specific thing, we will not hide that. We will make that public knowledge. And in fact, before the paper even came out, we didn't wait. When we started to have explanations, we started putting them up on the UAPx website, saying, hey, there's this thing. We thought it was a UFO. Oh, no, it's actually this. It's, FLIR camera noise, or it's this other thing. We were very open and transparent as we made our own self-discoveries of things we thought initially were ambiguous or anomalous. So the one thing you're going to get from UAPx is you're going to get the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts. And sometimes the truth is going to be all these supposed UFOs that we put emotional investment in turn out to have ordinary explanations. And we need to accept that, and that's part of the scientific process. But on UAPx and at UAlbany, collaborating with UAPx, though, we are, as we state in the paper, we are open to the crazy explanations. We want to find evidence for them. We're not out there to prove that everything out there is part of stuff we already know. That's what, the hardened skeptics do. We are out there to make discoveries. And so we are agnostic and we are open to the crazy ideas. And we say this 2 or 3 times in the paper. We're open to the crazy ideas, but the crazy ideas don't have a shred of solid scientific evidence yet. We're working towards that, but it's a slow process.
Yes, absolutely. And regarding the location, it's there was a nuclear physicist, the late Stanton Friedman, what was very well known in the field, and one of the very few videos he backed was one filmed from the shore of Los Angeles towards Catalina Island, and picturing a silver-shaped craft going above Catalina Island. And it was very interesting to me because he was very cautious about his reputation and the documents and materials he used in his demonstration. And one of the few pictures he really used was that video of Catalina Island. Where is it gone? Sorry, I lost myself in the comments. So you chose Catalina Island for its reputation, we could say. If you are able to garner enough funds to do a second campaign, do you have an area in mind? I don't want you to tell it because it will add a lot of noise, but have you already selected a secondary area of examination?
We have several in mind, yes. But the thing is, we need to balance the pluses and minuses of different locations, as well as potentially a reproducibility study back at Catalina or the Catalina area. So we need to balance the pluses and minuses of going like more places may be easier to get to, more local, versus reproducibility. Because if our famous, dark spot was actually something weird in the sky, does it come back? Right? We'd want to try to see that again. So and without having funding, we have to prioritize. And so within the team, we still need to weigh the pluses and minuses of different possibilities like that.
And regarding what you said earlier, I think most people don't understand science as a discovery tool because, of course, when you're subjectively doing the research, you have your hypothesis and you're trying to prove it right. But even if you don't, even if you fail as a scientist in your subjective mind, you still collected data that is a discovery. If you prove that your hypothesis is wrong, we still gain knowledge by knowing that the hypothesis is wrong. So I think that's something that is very tough to understand by many people about the field of science, is that yes, it takes time, takes funds, and from the common people, it seems like a lot of fails for very little discovery, but science is built on that process of failing hypotheses and succeeding a few of them.
Yes, so it's incredibly important to keep in mind that if a scientist goes out there to prove their pet hypothesis, that's not good science. It's very important to try to disconnect yourself. And that's hard because we're all human beings. We're not Vulcans, or machines. And it's extremely important to go out and take data in an unbiased fashion. And that's very hard to do. I'm not claiming UAPx did that perfectly. I'm not claiming any UAP group or any group in any field is capable of doing that perfectly. But you have to try, and you have to be aware of your biases. So I think it's very important that you don't do what you just said. You don't go out there to prove something. No, you go out there to prove or disprove. You need to be open to both possibilities. And sometimes it's not binary either. That's also an oversimplification. And probably evidence for versus against is a better way to talk about things rather than proof or disproof, because science is not math. You can never fully prove something versus disprove. That's not how it works. You gather evidence for a theory, and even if you have mountains of evidence, you still don't know if that theory is not part of a greater one. And that happened with, for example, with Newtonian mechanics. Mountains of evidence, Newtonian mechanics is right. Newtonian mechanics is right. We're done. But then along comes Einstein and relativity. It doesn't mean Newtonian mechanics is wrong. It was just incomplete. And so you have to always be careful. No matter how many mountains of evidence there is for a theory, you never finish proving a particular theory is right in most fields of science. And so I think that's very important to keep in mind, and also the importance of null results. One of the citations in the bibliography of our paper is from a chapter of a book called Measuring Nothing Repeatedly. And that's something we do in our field of dark matter, my mainstream field that I work on with my colleague Cecilia, is measuring nothing repeatedly. And this is important. That's not failure, because that tells you that still tells you valuable information. So we put into our paper here, we didn't just write up our remaining ambiguity, the hole in the sky, whatever it is. We also talked about the things we debunked. And we talked about the things that were really, really ambiguous still, like, our radar results. It's like, well, it could go either way. It looks like it's corroborative, but it's not at the same time. It's ambiguous. And so we focused also on our null results. We didn't just bury the null results. We just humbly threw out in the paper. That's why it's so long. We also were like, and here are the things that weren't anomalies, and here's why, and here's what we learned from that process of figuring out what it was. And so I think null results are underrated in many scientific fields. There are journals that don't allow replication studies and don't allow null result papers, and I'm like, that's like the foundation of the scientific method, is, of course, you need replication studies. You need, and you have to publish null results. That's part of the scientific method. Some fields of science, I won't name them because it'll anger people. I won't name them. There are some journals and some scientific fields that still haven't gotten this. My field of dark matter has. We keep publishing null results, but this is really important. There's a famous experiment, which we do mention in our paper as well in the bibliography, the and Morley experiment, where they didn't find evidence of the ether, but they found evidence of special relativity by accident. And that's great. Lots of great science happens when the result is not the one you want. So in terms of UAP, I do think there's something there to find, but I think we have not found anything conclusive yet with just our initial expedition and our initial results.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get back about what you said at the beginning of the interview with other scientists using your data to build over it, what is really interesting is that it was never done before to have that amount of publicly available instruments recording data that isn't classified. And you create a baseline of data. So, of course, the first time you look at that data, it's the first time it's examined. So, you have a lot of anomalies inside of it, and you need to investigate what is a true anomaly inside the new data sets. And then you can create the true baseline of, okay, so everything here is explained, and everything that goes above is really anomalous. And then all the other scientists that are working on the field and trying to find anomalies can use that work that you did, what we call UFO versus IFO in ufology, because you have an easy way of identifying strange but natural causes, you simplify your work of finding anomalies.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Um, So I would like to emphasize too that I really like the way you wrote the paper with the different possible explanation for the whole, because it was so interesting to see a proper scientist really tackling the subject and trying to find every possible conventional explanation to what was being recorded. I think that's something that is really not done enough, to be honest, in all researchers that are looking that field, that you need to prove first, or to be at least confident that it isn't really a conventional explanation that is behind what you recorded, to then say it's a possible anomaly. Um, why do you think that do you think the temptation of finding is so strong that people just cross away that step?
Yes, yes. I think it's but this is not unique to of course to UAP studies, which is still not, still on the fringe. This is part of human nature. You really want to find something. The opposite also happens. You're sure that something's not there. So you have to be clear there's two kinds of biases. The way we avoid this in my dark matter research is we have bias mitigation techniques like blinding, salting. We have different statistical techniques. You can never remove all bias and all human bias, but what you can do is mitigate it. So we've got an outstanding team because on UAPX, we've got all the different, we have the whole spectrum. We've got different scientists. I won't name them, but you know the co-authors and I named them earlier, so I won't say which one is which. But we've got people on the whole spectrum that you could classify from true believers who are so sure aliens are out there, like we just need to get that, final evidence. And then we have members of the team and colleagues also who review the paper who are 100% convinced, or 99, of the opposite. There's no non-human intelligence. It's all nonsense, and that's what makes UAPX and UAlbany and our collaboration so strong. Is we have a spectrum of people. It's kind of like the balance you get, from Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in the original series. Is we have scientists, and again, I won't say where I am, and I won't say where the others were. I don't want to also put words in my colleagues' mouths, but the way I see it, as my co-authors and my colleagues here really do represent a spectrum in terms of what you could call belief versus skepticism. And I think that's extremely good and extremely healthy, because if we start falling into the holy cow, we found something bias when we haven't yet, or the opposite, we found nothing when we found something, then the team member who's on the opposite side starts fixing it back towards the center. So we're really striving for centrism and agnosticism, and that's not easy. It's not easy to achieve, and even if you do achieve it, then you get rained on with anger and hatred from all sides, because then the true believers in aliens will tell you, oh, you're hiding the truth, you didn't go far enough. And then the very skeptical scientists and non-scientists, will start attacking you that you went too far, even though our conclusion says no results. Oh, you went too far. How dare you even waste your time studying UFOs? There's nothing to see there. So when you're close to the center, then you get hatred from all sides, from both or both sides, except it's, that's also an oversimplification. And so it's a hard place to be. To stand for the truth sometimes means you side with um, the people who are like, ha, we already knew all along it's real. But sometimes you have to side with the skeptics because you found an explanation for that UFO. And so it's a very hard place to be, where you just want the data to lead you where it will lead you, without a bias towards either skeptical or exotic explanations.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel the same torpedoes being fired at me when I'm trying to be straight on the line and not
Mhm.
to incline on one step or another.
Yeah,
I know that feel exactly, to be honest.
yeah, yeah.
um, Earlier, you said that what you took out of that field experimentation was the lessons you learn from it. What is the best lesson you learn about specifically studying UAP on the field?
Um, I think the most important lesson we learned was you've got to have you. It's not enough to have different types of sensors. They have to be they have to be synchronized, and you have to be ready. You have to have battery backups. You have to be ready for power failures. Again, I'm not just talking about like, oh, the UFO came and shut down the power. I want to be very clear that there are also mundane power failures because you just plugged in too much equipment. So I think it's very important to be that the time synchronization and being ready, more ready electrically, in terms of being able to withstand, to be able to be prepared for even mundane power failures caused by you. You want to be ready. You want to have your equipment running, have as much uptime as possible, combined with, like I said, second level time synchronization. I mean, that's just a summary, though. People should really look at the paper and look at the section that we title, what was successful and what was not successful. We have a section titled like that, about halfway through the paper, after we lay out the instrumentation and the future plans, to say, okay, but what worked and didn't work on our first expedition. And these are really what come to my mind as some of the most important lessons. You also need to have nonstop sky mapping. You need to know, where's the ISS, where are rockets that have been launched, where are the satellites right now in the sky, so that you don't mistake a human made a craft. So having the airplane map, we had that, and you could see that movie. It was really cool. We had like, ADS-B and stuff, but that's not good enough, because that's only airplanes. We want to make sure, we want to know where all satellites are. Where is Starlink, for example? Is there a launch? Like, we want to make sure we don't mistake a human craft other than airplanes. And so it's important to have, like, we've got to have the latest apps on all of our phone, like tracking. They have already existing apps for this, tracking all the objects in the sky at your current location. I think it's very critical to have that, and so that then when you see something, you point, your app at there and go, oh, okay, that's not a UFO. That's, Chinese satellite 765B or whatever. There are apps like this that track not just stars, planets, deep sky objects, galaxies, nebulas, but also human craft as well, rockets, missiles. Of course, it's not going to track the secret, experimental stuff, but it's important to have, to be better prepared next time. And so these are very valuable lessons learned, that we are not just saying, oh, we made these mistakes and we'll fix them later. It's so important that our papers are archived, so that all researchers interested in doing this see, don't make this mistake, that. So again, it's all about humbly building on each other's work, not just people citing our work, but we cited past work. And I'm sure we forgot people, but we have citations, Vasco, Galileo Project, and their papers. There are plenty of groups I'm sure we forgot because there's hundreds of UFO organizations, and I'm sure I'm going to get flooded with angry emails. How dare you not mention our group? And we already have a paper, and it's on archive even, and it's here. And I just want people to know that that wasn't intentional, because it's just there are too many UFO groups. It's really hard. So we really focus on ones where there were peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals. In some cases, like Vasco's, that actually have concrete anomalies they have found already. So we need to focus on the groups and the teams that already have relevant results to our paper. So we're not trying to, it's not, popularity contest, and we're not trying to snub anyone. We did our best to try to cite, and we still made mistakes, I'm sure, and missed citations of relevant works, but we did our best, and I did my best as first author, as corresponding author, to do this.
Have you ever considered writing a field guide on UAP study based on your experiments?
No, for two reasons. Number one, don't have the time. None of the teammates have the time, and so we need to focus on something that was more likely to move the field forward, which is scientific papers. I'm not saying what you're suggesting isn't valuable. Oh, it absolutely would be. Absolutely. I'm not downplaying that. But not only do none of us have time, but also I don't think anybody would read it, because one of the problems we have in UAP studies, and other fields of science have this too, nobody reads what other people write. They just want to do their own thing. Right? So one of the big problems in science is ego, is nobody wants to say that somebody else had a better idea than them and start using that. So if we do a field guide, then everyone else will have their own field guide, and no one's going to read our field guide. No one's going to care. So it would be, in my opinion, right now, it would be a waste of our time, because nobody would care and nobody would use it. It would just be a guide to ourselves, basically, because right now there are all these different groups still. But if you have a scientific paper, then that's different. Then other groups will conscientiously start citing each other, as we've been doing, and we hope the other groups will do to us. Then you start building a network, and then down the line, doing things as you suggest become more valuable after you've established a culture of collaboration. Because right now in UAP studies, you just need to go look at Twitter or X or whatever to see, right now, instead of a culture of a collaboration, we have a culture of insults and tearing people down. And I don't see that changing overnight. So I think that we need to build a culture of cooperation in UAP studies, so that if someone writes something like their own field guide, someone else, instead of ignoring it, or instead of crapping on it, says, you know what, we're going to use that, or we're not going to use that because you made these mistakes. Oh, you're right, we'll write a better field guide. You're absolutely right, we didn't do this and that, and you're right. And so basically we need a culture of cooperation, and reconciliation, and not one of ego, one of humility, where we all work together as human beings across international lines. Even that's why I'm here with you today, and we really work together to solve the mystery of UAPs without working in silos, and we just lob insults and unjustified criticisms. Justified criticisms are great, as I said, but we don't want to start lobbing insults and unjustified criticisms at each other. We want to work together. But we're at the top of the hour, and I'm very sorry, but I do have to go to my next meeting.
It has been a pleasure. And just to let you know, UFO Twitter isn't representative of the community itself.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I had trouble hearing.
My audience is 10,000 people. I have maybe 20 of them that are on Twitter. Twitter isn't representative of the people that are interested, and they are very interested in a field guide on UAP study.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I wasn't downplaying it. It was just we don't have time.
Sure, absolutely.
But I mean, this is why our paper's on archive. You can reverse engineer from it a reasonable outline of a field guide. So the raw material is still there, at least. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, Matthew. It has been a real pleasure to have you on board, and congratulations for your paper. I will be translating some passage, if you allow me, for my French audience, so they are aware of what to do.
Excellent. Yes, I'm very happy that you're going to be doing that.
Goodbye, Matthew. It's been a pleasure.
Goodbye. Take care.